Our studies of Shmuel is getting to the center. Today we have the 31st chapter of the book of Shmuel, which is the final chapter in Shmuel Al. And if you remember a couple chapters back, the Philistines have gathered together a great army, and sadly we already know that Shaul has been told that he will perish. And let's see how this plays out. Uflishtim Nilchamim Israel. The Philistines during this time, and we had just read in the last chapter, David was attacking the Amalekites who had destroyed his city. And during that same time period, the Plishtim are waging war with Israel. And similar to how the book started early in the book, where we saw the Jews lose a huge battle against the Plishtim, with the destruction of the Mishkan and Shiloh and the Ark being taken and Bnei Israel losing many and running away. That's what happens here. Bnei Israel are slain, they're scattered, and many of them fall on Har HaGilboa. Vayidbeku Plishtim et Shaul v'et banav. And the Philistines overtook, the word davak, like the Chazim say dvekus, in mystical literature, to cling to God. Here it's being used not to clinging to God, that the Philistines, they clung to Shaul and his sons. Vayaku Plishtim et Yehonatan v'et Avinadav v'et Malkishua b'nei Shaul. And sadly, terribly, Yonatan, three sons of Shaul, were killed, amongst them Yehonatan, who of course has been extremely loyal to David and asked David, made an oath and a pact with him that David would remain with him, but and they'll be brethren and they'll take care of each other's descendants in the future. But sadly, Yehonatan dies. We don't know if Yehonatan and Avinadav and Malkishua knew that they were going to meet their death in the same way that their father knew this. Vatichbad hamilchama el Shaul, and the battle was heavy toward Shaul. Vayimtzeu hamorim anashim bakeshet, and the archers found him. Vayachel ma'od mehamorim, and he was much frightened of the archers. And what's understood here, it's the Hebrew's a little bit cryptic, is that he was probably hit by an arrow at this point. That's what means the archers found him and they're spraying him with arrows. And Shaul turns, controversial thing in the book of the prophets, Vayomer Shaul enosei chelav. Shaul says to his weapons bearer, and it's interesting to think, if things had gone differently, his weapons bearer for a period of time was, of course, David. Would things have gone differently if he did not chase after, if he did not want to kill David? Things could have been completely different at this point in time. David, who God was always with, maybe things would have been different and David would have been able to save him, but he's chased away David. And thus he says to whomever it is that is his weapons bearer at this time, Shlof charbecha v'dakureni ba pen yavo areim aela udekaruni v'hitaluvi v'lo avan otech elav ki arei me'od v'ikach Shaul et hachera v'yipol aleha. So Shaul turns to this weapons bearer and he says, draw your sword and run me through it, i.e., kill me. Because if I don't get killed by you, then these uncircumcised men, again, the pejorative that's always used for the Philistines in these books, the uncircumcised men are going to come, they're going to run through me, they're going to mock me, they're going to torture me. But his weapons bearer was unable to do it. And thus Saul himself fell upon his sword. And of course he died. And in verse 5, Vayar nosei chelav kimei Shaul, vayipol gam hu al charbo vayamot. And when the weapons bearer saw what Shaul did and that Shaul was dead, he did the same thing and committed suicide. And all these people, they went down together, like Billy Joel, right? They all went down together on this day, sadly, terribly suffering and being killed or killing themselves. And of course, there are major questions that come here. Up here, suicide is prohibited in the Torah. How could Shaul do this? How could his arm bearer do it? And there's lots of literature, lots of discussion that's made whether or not it was justified in this period at this time because Shaul was the king of Israel and he would have been tortured, and how they would have treated him terribly and what that would have done to Bnei Israel. And so there's large discussions about whether or not this is the right decision and the wrong decision. What I get to in this chapter is, and I explained this back in my favorite chapter, was it chapter 28, when he, of course, is being told by the witch of Endor that he is going to die, and she comforts him, and Shaul goes on his way. He shows a tremendous amount of bravery there. He knows he's going to die in this battle. He's been told it by Shmuel, whose words were, tomorrow we will be together, right? You will be with me in the next world. You will be dead. And yet he goes. He leads Bnei Israel, even if he knows that he's going to be killed, even though he knows Bnei Israel are going to lose in battle, he understands that it is his responsibility as king of Israel to stand strong and to stand in front of Bnei Israel. Now, if they would have run away, presumably it would have been even worse, that many more innocent lives, let alone the soldiers, would have been killed. And so while at the one point he commits suicide, there is a lot of, I think, bravery here in the last battle of Shaul, that he goes to battle with everything that he knows is going to happen in this battle. Vayiru, we're continuing in verse 7. Anshe Yisrael asher be'ever ha'emek asher be'ever ha'den ki nasu anshe Yisrael v'chimetu Shaul vanav vayazvu et harim vayanusu vayavo plishtim vayishvu behem. And the people, the men of Israel who were, sort of closer to the lands of the Gaza, of the Philistines, when they saw that Bnei Israel was decimated in battle, and they heard Shaul and his sons had died, they left their cities and fled, and the Philistines came back and they occupied. Vayhimi mocharat, and on the next day, vayavo plishtim lefashet tachalim, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, right? They would go, they'd find the swords, they'd find jewelry, they'd find whatever cloths that they could take home. Vayimseu et Shaul vet shloshet banav noflim behar HaGilboa, and they found Shaul and his 3 sons on Mount Gilboa. Vayichrutu et Rosho, vayafshitu et Kelev, vayishlechu ve'eretz plishtim saviv levav levaser beit atzabehem v'eta'am. And they took him, they beheaded him, his dead body, and they pulled off his armor, and they sort of sent it all over into their lands, to the different idols, to the different places, to show that they had defeated Shaul, they had defeated Bnei Israel. When you read these verses, in these series of verses, and we'll finish up in a couple of chapter, in a couple of verses, it shows on the one hand the sadness as we finish sort of the halfway point, or the way that it was separated into a Shmuel al Shmuel bet. The beginning of the book, there was no king, there was no leadership in Israel. We're defeated, roundly, and here finally we have a king. He's supposed to wage war. He's victorious in wars and battle after battle after battle. But when Shaul unfortunately leaves behind the battles to go and kill David, and that becomes his main mission in life, everything reverts. So the book starts with a terrible battle against the people of the Plishtim, and now it's ending with a terrible battle of the people of the Plishtim. And even though David went and he beheaded Goliath after killing him, showing again the supremacy, and Bnei Israel are winning in these battles, they're defeating the Philistines, now it is once again reversed back. The Philistines have cut off the head of the king of Israel, and they've taken his vessels, they've taken his armor in the same way that David took the armor and the sword of Goliath, and they are right, and it's being sent through the land. Bnei Israel, they were on the bottom in the beginning of this book. They elevated to the top because of Shmuel, but now things have reverted back to the way it was earlier. Continuing now in verse, we're up to verse 10. Vayisimu et Kelev beit ha'od. Read that already? Yes, verse 11. Vayishmeu elav yoshvei Yavesh Gilad et asher asu plishtim l'Shaul. And the men of Yavesh Gilad, who live all the way, it's the other side, it's the east bank of the Jordan River, they heard about what happened to Saul. Vayakumu kol ish chayil vayachu chol halayla vayikhu et Givyat Shaul ve'et Givyat banav mechomat Beit Shan vayavo Yavesha vayisrefu otam sham. And when they heard, they went up at night and they took Saul's bodies and the bodies of his children, and they came and they returned all the way to Beit Shan, and they burned their bodies there. Vayikhu et atzmotehem, vayikbru tachat ha'eshel b'yavesha, vayatsumu shiv'at yamim. And after they burned, it doesn't seem like they burned their bodies. It's unclear exactly how that verse is supposed to be read, because then they're burying their bones, or they burning their vessels, clothing. It's unclear in that verse. Of course, we know you're not supposed to burn a body in Jewish life. Cremation is prohibited. You're supposed to bury the bodies, and so they bury the bodies under the Eshel, under a tree in Yavesh, and they fast for Shaul for 7 days. And this is sort of a sad ending to the book in a number of ways, and it's intriguing, or it's important. The great moment in Shaul's life was the beginning of his reign, when the people of Yavesh Gilad, back in chapter 11 or so, were threatened by Nachash HaAmoni. He said he would pluck out their eye. And they sent, of course, messages to Bnei Israel. Shaul got enveloped with the Spirit of God. He cut up an ox. He sent it all over the country, said, if you don't fight with me, into 12 pieces he cut up, then this is what's going to happen to you. And Shaul went, and he defeated Nachash. And Bnei Israel were very happy and proud, and they had a second coronation of him. And thus the people who have the most appreciation and love and recognition and desire to help Shaul and not let him be shamed are these very people from Yavesh Gilad, because he was the great hero to them. At the same time, he's the great hero to them. It's very sad and telling that they're the only ones who are fasting for these 7 days. We don't see anybody else yet at this point mourning over the death of Shaul and being, disheartened by it. Obviously, Bnei Israel in many ways are disheartened. And thus, if we want to think of Shmuel Aleph as a book, it ends on a sad note, not as terrible, I would say, as Pilegesh Begivah, the rape of the concubine at the end of the book of Shoftim, and then the kidnapping so that Binyamin can go and sanction rape, so Binyamin can once again enter into Bnei Israel and marry girls of Bnei Israel. But we see that so far, the enterprise of king has not worked out. There's a king, but it hasn't worked out. Bnei Israel are not winning more victories. They are stuck in the same rut. But what we know, of course, is even though we're disappointed and we're saddened that things have not moved forward, as we end this book, we know that, of course, the next king is in waiting. We know who it is. And we, of course, know that his success will be great, because King David was not just king, but he's the beginning of the dynasty of Israel. And we will continue to see David's reaction. Where is David? What does David have to say at this moment following the death of Shaul, and even more sadly to him, the death of his closest friend, Yehonatan? So we could say, I guess, Chazak, V'nit Chazek on finishing Shmuel Aleph, and we will continue tomorrow with Shmuel Bet, Perek Aleph.